Here we are, MCON. Okay, we're doing a post recap of MCON. With me, I have an OG DAO contributor who's quite active across multiple communities, including Forefront, including Creator Cabin. His name is Rafa. Welcome, Rafa. How you doing?
It's great to be here. It's great to be here. It's been a long week, and
Yeah.
this is we're in the stretch, and I think it's time to digest a little bit about all the different conversations that we've had at MCON this week.
Yeah. So I want to take a good portion of this to do like a recap of MCON.
Yeah.
So just for those who don't know, MCON, it's today's September 18th, 12:01 p.m. We are in Denver, Colorado. This whole entire week has just been festivities of DAO activities and OG DAOists and philosophy and parties and just an amazing time to kind of recap post-COVID and see all these internet people in person. So before we get into MCON, give me a quick brief about yourself. Who the hell are you? What were you doing before crypto and DAOs, and kind of where are you now?
So as you said, my name is Rafa. I'm Rafa the Builder on Twitter. And I've actually been practicing organization design and studying organization design for the better part of the last decade. And so I worked in manufacturing for a little bit. I worked in consulting, strategy consulting, and most recently in human resources technology for Web 2. But I've always been quite, I guess, dissatisfied with the way that the type of contract that employees have, and the fact that it's mostly a model about like resource management and like value extraction from resources, where I would want to be able to see something more about reciprocity and being able to create value together. And so through that conversation and through some experience in building in real life communities in London, I was looking towards a future of kind of the creator economy and how, you collab on Instagram nowadays, right? And what that future of collaboration looked like. And that ended up here in crypto and DAO land.
So tell me about the past communities that you built while you're in London. What did those look like, and how do they kind of relate to what's happening with DAOs right now?
Yeah, so I met one of my good friends in London about 8 years ago. And one of the things that as a young adult is you move to a new city and you want to make new friends, right?
Right.
And what no one had told me was the fact that you can actually make friends quite consistently, and you can make deep friendships, and you can create a community of friends by consistently showing up and by just creating events. It sounds very obvious in retrospect. All you needed to do was host a couple of dinners that I learned from my friend who kind of was doing it in London. And I realized that you can build a community around people who just want to be friends together and can become a source of support for each other. So in London, we intentionally built a community of just folks who wanted to spend time together. We hosted a book club, for example, for a while, and the community grew to about a group of, I'd say, about 200 people.
Yeah. Why do you think you've like naturally drifted towards organizational design? What is it about it that kind of like gets you going?
Oh, there's a good story here. So when I was my first internship, my parents wanted to teach me the value of work.
I feel like that's like a core principle that any family tries to instill. Okay?
Yeah. And coming from a family in Puerto Rico, well, they called my uncle who had a hardware store. They make doors and sell doors back in Puerto Rico. And they said, you're going to work there this summer for essentially minimum wage. They did pay me a little bit more than minimum wage. And my job was to count screws.
Mm-hmm.
So what that meant was I had to spend 8 hours a day taking this huge bag of screws and putting them in little baskets of 100 screws each. And I had to do this manually. So I had to like pick up, the screws, and I had to put them in little baggies. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there and, 8 hours, I'm in the basement, and I go to my uncle and I say, why don't we weigh them? So instead of counting them, how
You're
about
like,
we
I'm
weigh
so over counting this shit.
No, it's it's the number. It's not just inefficient. It's also the probability of me making a mistake is extremely high.
Right.
So I could increase the accuracy and increase my speed in doing it. And my uncle is like, no, like you're here to work, and you need to learn how to work. And I was like go back and I'm continuing counting, and
Oh
I'm
my
like,
God.
and I say, how is this producing any sort of value for this company? How is this company profitable?
Mm-hmm.
How is my uncle making money? Because if they're spending an entire full-time equivalent of me down here in the basement, which number one, I also thought was a complete waste of like, my interest in, for example, business development. But put that aside, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And there was a bunch of other people on like the payroll, and I just kept on asking, why is this like the case? And I still can't get that question out of my mind. So I kind of followed my nose on that. And every single job that I've had is continuing to understand, how do humans organize and like actually create value.
Interesting. That's when you look back into your career and you try to like piece the moments that influence you the most. And obviously in the moment you kind of question like, how the hell does this make sense at all? But those like core experiences end up making, like who you are today.
Yeah.
And you counting all those nails, like how is that equivalent to like organizational behavior in DAOs, right?
Yeah.
And not nails, bolts, right?
Yeah,
How does that kind of pertain to how people work in a decentralized manner? Have you found those similarities? Like what is the correlation?
Well, I think what kind of takes you from point A to point B is that one of the things that I realized, and this is part of the book club in London and part of conversations and also just human relationships in general, if you sit back, there's two different types of decisions that I think humans do. One type of decision is intentional, which is this is roughly speaking, and this is a false binary, but let's go through the theoretical exercise for a second. One is intentional, which means you wake up and you make a decision.
Right.
You have another type of decision, which is script based. You're thirsty, you go get a glass of water. You didn't make that decision. You just went and got a glass of water, right? Similar to that, there's 1,000 other scripts in life that you can choose to follow or not, and you can choose to analyze them or not. So getting a job and going to college is a script. It's a community script.
Right.
Making sure you don't drop out of high school is a script. Actually, dropping out of high school is also a different type of script that you could follow, right? And these are tied to different cultural components and community environments that reinforce certain scripts that you have.
Okay.
Now, where I'm going with this is that when one of the scripts that we don't challenge enough is actually the employment script. So we have a social construct where you must get a job and you must get paid. And the majority of the value extracted in that partnership actually goes to a central institution. And that is a tax, and not in a bad way. That is a necessary tax to be able to manage the transaction costs. That makes sense, and that script makes sense because as an individual, if I try to do something and I didn't have the distribution power or I didn't have access to the right technology, then the probability of my failure as an individual is actually very high. So what are my options? I can go high risk, high reward, right? That's entrepreneurship.
Right.
Or I can work for another company which has already solved the transaction coordination problem.
Right.
Now, that script is actually outdated. And what the DAOs are, why DAOs exist today is because we've realized that script, that acceptance of that specific coordination distribution tax actually no longer is the case. As an individual, the creator economy is coming through because an individual has access to the right technology and the transaction costs are low enough that your probability of success of finding a niche, a market, and monetizing it is actually much higher than most people realize. It might take 7,500 tweets to find a niche, but if you tweet enough about the same topic, you'll
develop that audience.
You develop the audience, or you find it. You know, whether the audience exists or not, that transaction process like happens, and then you can monetize the value that you're actually producing.
Mm-hmm.
That means that me counting screws, right, which was a transaction cost. You know, I'm working for an employer. If I tried to count screws by myself, I would have to find everybody that wanted their screws counted, which might take a lot of time.
Right.
I might have to tell them how I'm going to count screws.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, I'm going to have to charge them a lot more than minimum wage because it costs too much to do, right? So all of that doesn't work. It's better to be on the payroll, and I might be a loss as an individual, but overall the company might still be profitable.
So, but what is it about the decentralization part of organizations that helps kind of fit with your theory of scripts?
Oh yeah. So what happens is when you start thinking about what you can do as an alternative,
okay,
there are new models that emerge. Right. And you know, one potential model is actually the creator economy as a freelancer, right? The decentralization component is a new script which is now evolving, and the script goes like this. A group of people can get together on the internet and make money. That's it. That's the script. That's a new one though, that didn't exist in the public conversation in a long time. And I would say, as we say on Twitter, it's still early.
Mm-hmm.
But that script is really grabbing people's attention. You know, there's a bit of hopium is how people describe it, because there's so much opportunity. People say, hold on, I have an alternative to employment. And so now employment can go under scrutiny, and decentralization, a group of people can get together on the internet to produce value, actually becomes an attractive alternative to it.
Right. Talking about people getting together.
Yeah.
MCON.
Yeah.
Okay.
MCON.
First of all, how was MCON for you?
I mean,
I know behind the scenes you were telling me like, wow, what a conference, but tell me a little bit more.
So I think, so MCON, so I recently quit my Web 2 job.
Quick applaud.
Yeah. I wrote an article about why I made that transition. I talk a little bit about some of what we spoke about here, but and I aped into it. I was like, if I'm gonna go do this, I'm just gonna go full in. And so a couple weeks back, it wasn't even a week, I bought my tickets, you know, maybe like, you know, 2 weeks, like a week before the conference. And, you know, I emailed some people. I was like, I'm going to go, like, we're just going to go this full on. And the conference was so much more than what I expected it to be. And I think the driver of that kind of energy, because it was great to, for the community to provide itself some validation to each other for the work and what they've done for so long. You know, there's a lot of perseverance here that has gone into it. I can't really count myself in that yet. You know, I'm still new, but but it was really wonderful. It's something really magical to be surrounded by what I would call community stewards who have a vision of cooperative development and have a vision of creating generational wealth across individual communities. It's really awe-inspiring.
Yeah, I'll tell you my experience at MCON. I used to produce a lot of events, many events, like for the last 2 years, and now I'm finding myself attending more events.
Yeah.
And MCON was one of those like gatherings where the selective group of people that came, that was like strategically done in a way where you could have like high quality caliber people, right? And you just felt you were just like the dumbest person in the room all the time.
Oh
right?
Man, that imposter syndrome is,
you know, and like you're listening to these conversations and you're listening to the people behind them, and you're listening to how critically people are thinking about this stuff in their free time.
Yeah.
It just makes
it's
everything
serious fun.
Yeah, it's serious fun. That's why they called it MCON.fun.
Yeah, MCON.fun. That's right.
So what were some of like the biggest takeaways for you from MCON?
Beyond
the partying, beyond the drinking,
So I think, I just want to mention one point. You talked about the caliber of the person that was attending. I think part of that is actually the pandemic. The people who came were the people who paid the tax, the pilgrims.
Yeah.
One might call it.
Yeah.
And like any pilgrimage, you go to Burning Man, it takes effort to get there and to participate. And so I think one of the things that MCON did, I know the community is small to begin with, so you have like a group of hardcore people, but I think part of this is the pilgrims got together, right? They came together for a specific vision, and they came to lend tribute to the vision and the community development that it has. And it needs to be serious fun for someone to say, I will be a pilgrim, right? It takes time.
One of the most memorable points for me, this was on day 3. So yesterday on Friday, you step outside of the Woods Brewing Company and you just see like a circle of people just sitting in the middle of the street, and just like ideating on like DAO philosophy and talking about the future of organization, the future of collaboration on the internet, tokenomics, mechanism design.
Do you know how that started, that circle?
No.
On the floor? Yeah. No. So a couple of folks on Telegram got together, and since Friday didn't have any programming, it was just a group of 5 people on Telegram that said, hey, let's get together at the chili pad. So like at MetaCartel's kind of like pad, and let's discuss it. But when I got to the event center, and I was like, why are we going to chili pad? Like, why doesn't everybody come here? So I had like texted the Telegram group, and I was like, executive decision, we're doing it here. And so we sit down, and there's like 6 people to start, and we start having a conversation, and then more people join one at a time. And then we're like, well, we don't have enough space on the table, so let's like start sitting down. And we sit down, and more people join. And then people start crowding around, and they start listening, and they decide to contribute. And actually, that is exactly how decentralized organizations work.
I was just gonna say that,
that it's exactly the same way. You get a core group of people who just want to do something, but you do it in public, and you're not necessarily loud about it, but you're consistent about it. Talk about it for a while. And other people start listening, and they start contributing. And you see people move through this concept of like contribution zones, right?
Which we'll get into in a minute.
We're gonna lurk. I'm watching from afar. There's something going on there. I get a little bit closer. I decide to invest a bit of my time or resources in it, and then I might decide to contribute or to listen and maybe participate or signal, as we might say, and then determine a specific course of action, and actually then get involved in production.
What would you say are like some of the biggest alpha takeaways?
Oh yeah, let's get back to that.
That you picked up from MCON.
What's the alpha? For those who are listening, I don't know if you've come across this concept of what alpha is, but it's like
the epitome of top-notch info.
It's the hot topics and like the good insights.
Right.
There's a couple different ones. Like actually wrote a Twitter thread about this morning. I think a couple of things stood out. The first is like the level of ambition is like really high, and like but it's ambition from a group of people who are humble and honest about what they're trying to execute.
Sure.
They didn't that's like really impressive, and like there's a lot of insight that actually comes from that discussion, because the principles that these people are using to think about product development, to think about community development, is not I'm going to create wealth. You might go to a startup conference that they're going to talk about cash flow and talk about runway and talk about how can I get a bigger multiplier on my valuation. I didn't hear a single conversation about valuation discussions. And that's because valuation is not the end goal. The end goal is actually creating a movement of people who believe that there is an alternative script and an alternative way to actually produce value in the world, which is not competitive, it's collaborative.
How do you think we scale this movement without diluting its value, its ethos?
So during the circle yesterday, this was a very, very important topic of discussion, because what makes the magic and what gives you the energy today is actually the fact that you have this ethos, you have these vibes. Right. It's all about vibes here. Like I'm mostly here for the vibes.
We all
and like how do you scale vibes?
Right.
Startups actually talk about this quite often, right? They say, how do I scale culture? I have 5 people, I have a founding team, I'm like tight knit squad. How do I scale culture? And
the only way to do it is with memes.
You joke, but that is the answer.
Yeah.
That the answer is you scale it with memetic information that reinforces a specific value system. Now, you can introduce new memes and you can introduce new metaphors. I really like thinking about the language that's actually used. And during the circle, we talked about the importance of developing a common lexicon of vocabulary and values that we want to use. Doctrines, one might say. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Wordly Maps, but he's another person who works on strategy and org design, very, very well known, and talks about doctrines. And the most basic, one of the first components of any type of collective like collaboration process is we need to be able to understand each other. And with a new DAO ecosystem, or I prefer to call them digital native organizations, because some are not autonomous or some are not decentralized, but they're all like internet natives. We don't have a common lexicon yet. Here's an example of what I just said. Like, what is a DAO? What is all this coordination for? What is our compensation structure? What counts as a token or an NFT? Like, what is a contributor? And we're in the process of that emergence in terms of both a value system, which we're trying to identify without locking ourselves in place, because self-referential problem here, and the operational process, so that people who want to participate in this process and are, we're going to have a tsunami of people like joining us soon enough. They're already coming.
Right.
And how do we help people maintain the same conversation and the same value system, using the same language and foundational processes?
Yeah. I want to pivot for a minute to focus on, because you're a DAO contributor across multiple communities, right? Between Forefront, between creator cabins, I want to kind of pivot into your time at Forefront, okay? And bring up one primary article that you recently published on behalf of Forefront, talking about contribution zones, which really, really stood out to me, and I don't think it got enough attention. So this is me putting it on blast and giving it more light, okay? But first, for those who don't know what Forefront is, how would you summarize Forefront in like an elevator pitch?
An elevator pitch. Forefront is the port of entry to Web3, is how we want to describe it. I say we as, Forefront, but the truth of the matter is, this is like quite emergent. Now, what does a port of entry mean? It means that we want people to be able to go to Forefront, get the right resources, be able to find the right DAO for them, or the right social token or social engagement. And so Forefront is kind of like a content first organization where we're publishing, doing research with regards to different organizations online, and right now trying to help other social organizations partner with each other, right? We think about all these organizations or digital native orgs as cities, right? The metaverse.
And there's a really cool graphic that you guys put together, and I'll put it in the show notes for everyone that's listening, that I like. This was the first time I got to visualize a DAO, right?
That's right.
And do so in a way where it felt relatable from the architecture of a city.
That's right.
Okay. And I think you guys did this so strategically and so beautifully, and the color coding like makes it all. Okay, so right now, just for those who are listening, and go to adamlevy.io/blog, and you'll be able to see the image. But there's 4 colors: blue, green, yellow, and red. And blue is governmental, green is green space, yellow is residential, and red is commercial. And it looks like it's the architecture of basically a city. And first off,
Well, it's Tallahassee.
this is Tallahassee. Okay, that was my first question.
Yeah.
And second, what is going on here? Okay,
Yeah.
Give me the breakdown, and how did you like kind of come to the idea of color coding specific areas that specific color, right? So give me the rundown. What's going on over here?
What's going on?
Yeah.
So I read this book recently. Well, not recently. That's a lie. I have this book which was recommended to me by Ben Cat, who does like Ribbon Farm and Breaking Smart, some other blogs, and I tweeted. I sent him a direct message, and he's like this really big guy. I love the work that he does, really forward thinker. And I said, hey, if you were going to recommend one book on org design, or like a couple, what would you recommend? And he recommended 2. He said Seeing Like a State, and he recommended another one called Images of Organizations. And within that book, the author talks about how, depending on the language and the perspective that we do, we can envision organizations as different types of like entities, whether a machine, we can say like operational effectiveness of an organization, right? You're thinking about a metaphor about a machine that has specific inputs and outputs. Or you can think about it as a brain and talk about learning loops, or as a series of other entities. And that book really kind of released, I guess, made me realize that organizations can be essentially whatever we describe them to be. And when I was thinking about digital organizations, I was thinking about this pattern of people getting together, and they're like, if you go to different Discord channels, they've got the tavern channel, they've got the chit chat channel, and it feels like you're walking around a neighborhood. And I was like,
that's a good analogy.
And you move between one Discord channel and another, and people talk about teleportation, but that's what you're having. You're teleporting yourself from one digital city to another. And so when I was thinking about there was a question in Forefront, which is, we need to figure out, how are we going to pay people? Like, how are we going to talk about different members? Because different members are contributing in different ways. And then these 2 ideas just kind of collided and said, well, if a digital city has different neighborhoods, well, maybe there's different zones that people are participating in, a commercial zone or a residential zone. And I was like, but maybe there's different levels of commitment and engagement than that we have. And maybe each person then flows through different contribution zones in different neighborhoods. And maybe I'm a lurker right downtown, not really going anywhere, but I'm just a tourist. I'm just hanging out. That's a one level of commitment in a specific area of your digital city. Versus maybe you're an active contributor in the suburb where your home is. You're part of the board,
right?
And you're actually doing specific work, and you're committed for a specific amount of time or for specific projects. And so when we start thinking about what language do we want to use to describe these digital organizations, I really wanted to stay away from thinking about them as machines with inputs and outputs, because that's actually not how they work. They're too complicated for that.
Yeah.
They're like these like organisms where they react to a specific environment. And but we also need to be pragmatic and make it simple enough for people to understand kind of what's happening. And like I was probably lucky and inspired, and I was just like, these ideas kind of collided, and suddenly you can see them, right? It was quite eye-opening to write the article, because as I was writing it, I was transforming the way that I was viewing the online landscape.
Yeah. these contribution zones are very much like operating models for
Yeah.
DAO, right?
What's up, guys? Adam Levy here. Sorry for the quick pause, but I want to give some love to our 5 NFT sponsors who are making this episode happen. They are Coinvise, POAP, Cello, Social Stack, and Prime DAO. First off, on Coinvise, you can create a personal or community-owned social token on Ethereum. Coinvise also helps you create incentives through token rewards and bounties, NFT business models, and bot integrations for Discord. Discover more by visiting coinvise.co today. Next up, we have POAP, or short for Proof of Attendance Protocol, who enables a novel way of creating one's life diary. Leveraging NFT technology, POAP facilitates an easy way to mint non-fungible tokens related to meaningful events. It's frequently used in crypto-native communities, and now it's starting to create NFT collectors in the mainstream too. Collect or launch your own POAP today by visiting poap.xyz. Next up, we have Social Stack, a platform for communities, brands, and creators to build mission-driven social token economies. Offering an easy-to-use, non-custodial wallet with a suite of open-source community engagement tools, Social Stack makes it simple to bring your community into Web3 and be a part of creating an open-source, gratitude-driven future for social tokens. Create a free social token wallet, discover mission-driven social token communities, or apply to launch your own token on Social Stack by visiting socialstack.co today. Next up, we have Cello. Are you looking for an ecosystem of dApps, currencies, and tokens that can connect you with people no matter their device, carrier, or country? Well, say hello to Cello, a mobile-first platform that makes crypto dApps and payments accessible to anyone with a mobile phone. Cello supports thousands of projects from builders, developers, and artists who every day build applications and issue tokens from all over the world. Visit celo.org today to learn more. And last but not least, we have Prime DAO, a collective of DeFi builders and DAO veterans attempting to turn DeFi into a more cooperative ecosystem by creating DAO-to-DAO interactions. The first solution to go live is Prime Launch, a launchpad experience for DAOs built in collaboration with Balancer. If you plan on launching a DAO, head over to prime.xyz to access a network of partners and tools that will jumpstart your DAO development today. All right, back to the episode.
How can DAOs kind of nurture a space for experimentation to find that right, contribution zone, that right operating model, right? How do you kind of think about that?
Yeah. So in Forefront, what we identified was that we had kind of 3 main, I think, contribution zones, right? You had 3 levels of participation. One, you're watching, one that you're actually doing, and one which you're actually maybe enacting the community needs. So being more like a steward. And this might be common across many DAOs, but it actually might not be the same, similar to what you described. Like, it might be different because a DAO or the digital native org that you're working with may actually have a command and control model where you have a very central group of people then delegating work to others. Maybe your organization is closed and you don't really have lurkers. Right? You might be recruiting people specifically to work in the digital environment. So how do you explore your digital city and the digital city that you're creating? Well, it's similar to moving into a new city. What do you do when you move into a new city?
You go on meetup.com and you try to find people.
You walk around. You
get
in the car.
That's a good. That just shows you the difference between you and I. In like Europe, you're more like around people. It's different culture. I feel like in LA, okay, meetup.com.
But it's exactly it. You look for people. You look for things to do. And similar to any type of digital city, you have different layers to it and different meshes of environments, right? You have in Europe specifically, you have the tourist track. Right. I mean, you have this in the States. You can go all through New York and see only the tourist stuff. Go to Times Square, go to Logan Square, and you're going to get overpriced, terrible merchandise. And it'll be the New York experience, right? It's terrible, but it's true. That's the tourist track.
Right.
And in digital cities, you have similar. You have different layers. You have local neighborhoods. when you're thinking about your digital city, number one, I'm not for like a central planning, so don't try to design your city. You don't do that. Similar to how cities are encouraged to grow, you can actually define specific zones of specific type of work, so you plant seeds in terms of it. I think listening for these specific signals and during a tour of your own city that you've been creating and reflecting on how people are engaging is the best way to actually learn. And it's emergent, New York is not the same New York it was 50 years ago. And your digital city is not going to be the same digital city next month. I mean, we're moving at a way different pace online.
Let's pick apart this tourist track for a second,
Yeah.
Okay? Because just to recap, New York, you could take the tourist track and see all the very low quality, but what everybody else sees. It's high quality, but it's not there's more to New York beyond just a tourist track.
Yeah.
Do DAOs need a tourist track?
That's a great question.
If they do, how do you even design a tourist track for DAOs?
Yeah. What do you want a tourist track?
I don't know.
Just gut.
You know what I'm imagining right now? I'm imagining me going online and having in LA and all these micro DAOs, and being able to navigate through them and kind of pick apart just the higher level takeaways. That's what I would consider a tourist track,
Yeah.
But
what are the monuments?
Yeah.
You want to go see the monuments?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But what does that look like in a DAO?
I don't think we know yet. I mean, I think this is part of at MCON here. We spent all these days, and one of the hot topics was actually onboarding.
Yeah.
And this actually relates to that type of onboarding experience, which is when you visit one of these digital cities and you're trying to figure out whether you want to move in whatever engagement level that you would be interested in having. What information do you show? And who do you want to attract? Tourist tracks attract tourists. Do you want your DAO filled with tourists? Well, maybe, because maybe your DAO sells DAO merchandise.
Right.
And maybe you want tourists to come and hang out and drop and buy an NFT and then leave and not bother you anymore. Right?
It's almost as if these DAOs will have galleries comprised of user NFTs,
it could be.
And the tourist track is literally understanding the culture of each DAO and navigating through each micro museum, you know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah.
Kind of thing.
That's one of the many different ways that you could create a certain type of experience for a specific type of person. Or I prefer to call them agents that come into the DAO.
You know what I'm imagining right now? What's the Hollywood tour bus moment?
Yeah.
What does that look and feel like?
What does it look and feel like? And does it provide value, and do you want it?
Yeah.
Do you want it? Does your community want that type of experience? In Forefront, one of the things that we've been talking about is there's so many people coming into the server, but they don't necessarily know where to go.
Right.
And it's similar to a new city, which has buzz. You got a gold rush going on, and all the people are coming in and they're saying, I found Forefront, I found the blog. I came in here, and actually turns out that we don't have well-paved roads yet. And people are crowding in different places and asking the shopkeepers, hey, I want to move in.
Yeah.
And the shopkeepers are well, number one, do you know what you're moving in for? And they're like, no, you haven't told me. They're like, yeah, we probably
no, just take my money.
And they're like, I just want to spend my time here. What can I do to help you?
Yeah.
And the shopkeeper is like, look, I'm really busy right now. I'm making some shoes. I have a lot of shoes to make for the people who are already here.
Yeah.
And you want to hang out? Why don't you go make some shoes? And they're like, I don't know how to make shoes. And they're like, well, you teach me how to make shoes. And so the shopkeepers are trying to balance now between their own internal production, but also onboarding the new people who are coming in.
It's almost as if you need to develop micro apprenticeship programs, of people just watching the shoemaker making shoes,
That's right.
And learning from them. And what does that look like?
You don't want to sacrifice, there's a big balance here between automation and the actual human empathy and engagement and belonging, right? Part of the reason why digital organizations are are so special is because people are actually finding a source of purpose in participating in this different script. And so it comes back like that. I help run a nonprofit in Puerto Rico, which is called Obras del País, and we do micro documentaries for artisans. And we've learned a lot about how artisans also engage and like bring people in and onboard them. But similar to the artisans, the people who are really full time in DAO land, they're like craftspeople. This isn't automated work. This is community management and community stewardship. It takes time, to take that raw material, just like a group of people, and turn it into a source of value and production. You build a community in real life, you're not going to get a community in a week, no matter how hard you try and how much hazing you do to, have them bond.
Yeah.
It takes years of consistent conversation to get to different layers of participation.
Right. And, the equivalent of entering that shop to talk to the shopkeeper who's making the shoes is, and I would take this again, I'm looking at the contribution zone article that you wrote. And again, I'll reference it in the show notes. Every single person that's entering the shop starts as a casual contributor.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And if they want to start helping build the shoes, right, then they become core contributor.
Yeah.
Right. And then what if they want to open their own store?
Yeah.
Then they become staff.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
And moving through I think though there's an important distinction here. It's easy to conflate contribution zones with like a career ladder. And that's actually not the case at all. So like contribution zones are supposed to be personalized preferences. So maybe I am a casual contributor because maybe I don't want to have my own store. I don't want to commit over a period of time.
Yeah.
And it's really important to differentiate between career level, which is an old script of a traditional organization, versus what we talk about in contributor zones, which is a personalized experience within that digital city, which is for you, right, as an individual and your preferences and needs and opportunities.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that I continuously see across DAOs is there's a lot of like active contributors and passive contributors.
Yeah.
How do you narrow that gap?
Yeah,
how do you get more people in the store, right? And how do you develop it in a way where the shoemaker, there's a ton of them that the system welcomes and allows, but also encourages. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that's a fundamental problem across many digital organizations that have a token. Retail is going to ultimately speculate on it. And we saw it a lot with Friends with Benefits recently when they did their raise, and it reaching to about 200 a token, and retail investors seeing the opportunity and et cetera, even now with Forefront, and they did their private quote unquote raise, or their select raise. And like, how do you narrow that gap?
Yeah. So I think you're actually referencing here another like traditional script, which is growth as a primary objective. That's not necessarily needed. And maybe you don't want to narrow that gap. Maybe you just want to have a bunch of low-level contributors and you want to make it hard to become core and staff because you don't want that many. And
that's a new perspective that I heard.
Yeah, growth is not the end game. It's actually just purpose and mission and tailoring and creating a community, a city that provides you a specific experience. There's a lot of small towns that don't want to become a city. There's a lot of cities that don't want to become a mega metropolis. And I think we as collectively, as we move into digital native organizations, we need to be quite conscious of the fact of chasing growth or capital, value development for the sake of it, and kind of realize that maybe we don't want any of that. But in most cases, look, like if you're founding a city, you do want to get some staff and some contributors, right? So narrowing that gap is still important for specific areas. I actually think this is going to come back to pods. I mean, Chase and I joke about pods, and it's a joke, pods. But I think the answer is that the unit of maturity actually is not from an agent perspective as an individual, is actually maturing via different like squads or small groups of people who are becoming more involved and committed together over a period of time. And you might move between one group and another. You might be part of multiple groups. But I think it's going to be similar to the cohort-based courses and that what we're seeing. And there's this really great book about called Situated Learning and Legitimate Peripheral Participation that talks about this. That is about getting better at contributing, and we can provide people tools to become better contributors, and we can give them new scripts, right, to become better contributors. I think part of what we need to do right now is let that emerge a little bit, because I think there's no hard-coded answers yet.
Yeah. One thing that I'm like really excited about with the development of DAOs is the increase in development in tools and platforms that will help better organize DAOs, better communicate between peer-to-peer. What are some of the biggest problems that you see needing to be solved right now with tools and platforms that could be solved with tools and platforms or products, for example? Anything that comes to mind? That haven't been answered yet, particularly.
That haven't been answered yet. I mean, I think this is such a new environment. There's just like, you can pick any product and go at it. So think about how much software a standard startup uses today. They use and they use a ton directly, and even more so indirectly. Right. Each piece of software that they use uses another 100 pieces of software, and each of those 100 like use another 100. If you look at the marketing advertisement like landscape has I don't even know like HR has hundreds of products. Like the hundreds of products that are named, like not even like that someone put on a map. Like how many data analytics tools do you have? I think but I do think that there's a common trend here, and actually I had this conversation a couple of days ago with MetaDreamer, and we were talking about product development for digital native organizations. And I think there is a paradigm shift that's happening, because operational tooling in Web 2 has traditionally been much more about like input process. I'm oversimplifying this. I'm sure this isn't true across the board. Let's just do a mental experiment for a second. But you use Salesforce or
I use different CRM. Let's say HubSpot.
Right? And you input data into HubSpot. In digital native organizations, there's something a little bit different going on, which is the software is built around the information feed which exists. So Collabland, you don't input information to Collabland. Collabland reads your wallet. So it reads your transaction feed. And I think we're going to see a major operational change in which we're going to have all this like new toolkit, which is going to read the information and the conversations that we're having and then provide value on top of it, kind of like how we have like Discord bots.
The most like relevant example, and this comes from a startup that I met at MCON. They're an FWB, and I'm blanking out on their product name. I see the logo in my head, but the takeaway is they're trying to develop tooling for treasury management. Okay, and they want to help DAOs identify like what's an employee cost or like a member cost, what's an expense cost, what's an overhead cost, merely based off the snapshot proposals that get accepted.
That's right.
Right, and
again, you're reading
data.
The feed. You're not asking someone to come in and input the numbers in an Excel spreadsheet. That's the previous approach. We had to input information. And like, so the new products that we're developing, so to get to your question before, which is what operational opportunities we have, I mean, all of them.
Wow.
You have all of them.
You should see I have chills right now.
You have all of the opportunities. have opportunities for scheduling and calendar management where it's reading your agreements on calendars and like pinging you and telling you, hey, by the way, you have a conflict at that time with a different Discord or a different digital city. You've already committed to teleporting to this other digital city at that time. Would you like to delegate this to someone else? Would you like me to record the meeting and send it to you? Not reschedule. Like, what type of participation would you like to have since you already committed to be in person in this other environment?
My mind is blown right now.
Like, and so
is that already happening, by the way? Do those tools exist?
I don't think so. I'm just like,
guys, build it.
Yeah, build it. And if you want to have a conversation about this, like the primitives have changed. Like I tweeted this earlier, and the primitives always change. You know, your engagement with reality is always off. I don't really see the world, right? I see a projection of the world as it is. But there is something really, really important, which is our foundational coordination mechanism is no longer data input. It's actually data synthesis. The data exists and we're producing it. And we now have an opportunity to build a completely new toolkit and operating model, which is not based on me moving from one interface to another, but having these programs read the engagements that we're already doing, read the chain, read the ledger, and then make recommendations and help you produce value.
That's deep. Yeah. That's a new perspective I've yet to come across.
Well, and this is when people ask me, why did you quit your job? I said, because you can't unsee this.
Yeah.
You can't go back to building a product like Salesforce, asking salespeople to input information when you know that the future is going to be based on salespeople getting nudges based on transaction profiles that are automatically generated, and every single engagement is going to be recorded, and you're going to live in these digital cities, and the salesperson is going to move from one digital city to another and creating audiences of purchasing, not like single point of control decision making. Like, you see this change and you're like, am I going to wait? Am I going to build this for the next 5 to 10 years for an enterprise solution, which, by the way, they're going to make obviously a lot of money. Like, sure, they're going to make a lot of money. That industry is not going to go anywhere. Web 2, like, I'm sorry, folks, hot take here, it's going to be here forever. Like, this ain't, but we do have a new economic model, which is going to be developed in parallel. It's going to be similar to, like, yeah, we still have traditional manufacturing, and like there's still some farms that are, have people picking fruit. Like, you still have old models of work, and maybe those aren't good examples, but you still have old models and new models of work. The world has not been digitized completely. And in the same way that the world has not moved to digital transformation, as the enterprise say, we haven't done the mobile transformation. We'll have an AI transformation. Yeah, we'll have collective intelligence or digital city transformation. And Facebook is going to hire people to be like, we want to incorporate DAO land ways of working into our organization. They'll pay McKinsey for it. That doesn't
I don't even think
Facebook.
McKinsey could do it.
I think they will sell
attempt.
it. They will sell it.
They'll create like infographics, like the
100%.
DAO landscape 2023. What you need to know.
What you need to know. Top 5 leadership skills for which is like
for DAOists.
Top 5 leadership skills for executive retreat to learn about community stewardship. The same way that we have servant leadership.
Is that how we know we've reached the top? So like, when we see shit like that.
I mean, I don't know, man. Like, the world is weird. I don't think we're gonna understand when we hit top.
Yeah.
I mean, what's happening is a mass migration of people from one ecosystem to another one. The same way how everyone went to tech, right? Yeah. And we're gonna see a massive wave of the people moving from corporate to tech, and now from tech to digital cities. And it will self-select.
Yeah.
Right. And like, yeah, it's hard to unsee the pattern and to see the opportunity, and to, you know, to say we can build something new and it doesn't need to be exploitative, right? I mean, exploitation is never right. You should never do it. But we have an opportunity to, instead of extracting value from an audience, to creating community value together, right? Grow the pie as a foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so many things to unfold here and to dive deeper in. I want to end off with 2 more questions. Okay.
Yeah.
What we're talking about right now is, I'd argue, is a bit philosophical, right? We have yet to see an organization really execute on this and create like major
$1 trillion
exactly
company.
How does this tie back into creators? Okay.
Yeah.
And how does this kind of tie back into them monetizing or being stripped away portion of their efforts across Web 2.5, Web 2 platforms, right?
Yeah.
How can they adopt this next era with their communities that are inherently Web 2?
I think, yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, right now we still have like a bunch of gatekeepers, right? You pay the tax, the YouTube tax, the Facebook tax, like Snapchat tax, the TikTok tax, you know, they're all taxes, because you still have gatekeeping. But there are different ways. I mean, you're seeing it with the NFT landscape where people are making their entire year's salary worth of like YouTube ads in days by putting their video up on glass.xyz, or, you know, that I really love this comment. Someone told me years ago, we were having a conversation, we were talking about like paying for a blog. We were like, number one, no one's going to pay for a blog. I don't know how long ago this was. This is like 5-10 years ago. No one's going to pay for a blog. It's just words on the internet. Like, it's your opinion. People are going to pay for your opinion. And then the next comment was like, no one's going to pay for a blog post. Like, who's going to pay for a blog? You have a subscription service. It's like, no one's going to pay for it. And then Mirror shows up. And people are buying blog posts. And the next conversation will be, no one will pay for your paragraph. And no one will pay for your sentence. And the reality is that they will, and they'll get micro-referenced across the board. And you'll create new network economics where I write a blog post and I reference you, and a portion of my money using, for example, splits will get reallocated, and we'll create a passive income economy where, as you create online, the rewards will flow back to the sources.
One thing that I'm really excited about, and there's a project or a DAO that's going to be on season 3 called Global Coin Research. And their whole model, and I tweeted this a while ago, it's like, I don't want to pay $1 subscription for a yearly access to the New York Times. Like, it's $1, you know, like, but I just don't want to do that. I don't want to go through that funnel of like, all right, enter your first name, your last name, your email, and then you're going to get spammed with other promotional offers, you know? I'd rather just connect my wallet, hold the amount of tokens, and get access to a floodgates of knowledge. I'd rather buy $500 of your token than pay $1 for a yearly subscription.
It's insane. Right. It's absolute, but it's so true. And the reality is, like, no one wants to input information. So going back to the product development conversation we just had, I don't want to put my name and my credit card and give you my personal information and have you grab my cookies. It's like, can I just sign in and give you?
Can I just be me? Can I just do it?
Can I just do it? Can I just like read and consume and like automatically stream like micropayments, like based on the information that I'm consuming, and have a budget with regards to it, and have a product that is telling me how much budget I'm using on information consumption and make recommendations on it. And I think that is a future that it's here. The tooling is here.
I wanna end off with one final question. Okay, and this is something that I ask everybody. And I'm personally a big fan of the development of the internet. Okay, and looking at like Web 1 and how that was very read only, right? And how that transitioned into Web 2 and building like online communities that were gated by big corporations and how they manipulated data, right? And how everything became a service kind of thing, you know, or a lot of companies moved to SaaS models and whatnot. And now we're seeing like the transition into Web 3. And collectively, like Web 2 ate Web 1. The argument is that Web 3 is going to eat Web 2. And Web3 is all about like ownership, right? Pseudo-anonymity, right? What's going to eat Web3?
I don't know. It's like, if you asked me like 5 years ago what was going to eat Web 2, I don't think I would be able to answer it. But
the reason I ask you is because you're already identifying pain points that's happening in Web 2.
Yeah.
And like, what happens when you scale those solutions on Web 3? Is there any detriment to that? And what could that be that might influence Web 4?
Yeah.
From an organizational point of view, I guess.
There was Neil Stephenson. I wrote this book. I can't remember what the name was, but in the book he talked about feed customization. And so I think right now we don't have control over the information flows that we actually consume. So I think if Web 1 is read and Web 2 is read and write, or read and create, and Web 3 is read, create, and own, the Web 4 is probably going to be read, create, own, and curate. And I think
what do you mean by curate? Elaborate on that.
It'll be a customization of the engagement that you have. Right now, we don't have control over the information feeds. You join a Discord and you're part of every channel that you get assigned to. You get every piece of information and you have a lot of noise. And we don't know how to control for that right now. And even the Web3 tooling that we're developing is enabling ownership over the data that we're producing, but it's not enabling the customization of the data that you consume. So maybe that's what comes next.
It's a great take. That's the first perspective that I heard on curation. I've heard like the second that everything is on chain, what's like the detriment behind that? You know, I've heard dystopian like theories, you know, like we entering like a Black Mirror type of situation where people are like, everybody's valued based off their publicly traded token, you know, and what that kind of looks like. But that's a good point. Rafa, what a pleasure to have you on. You're honestly a pool of knowledge when it comes to this specific stuff. So thank you. For everyone that's listening, where can they find you? Where can they learn more about you? And of course, I'll reference your Twitter and all these links that we talked about. But plug yourself.
So you can find me at Forefront at Cabin DAO, which is supporting different creators and creating a decentralized city. But for the most part, you can find me on Twitter at Rafa the Builder, so RAFA and the Builder. And if you want to connect, just send me a message.
Amazing.
And definitely support your local artisans and your local crafters.
Amen. Thank you so much.